I stood frozen in our bedroom doorway, my lungs refusing to breathe. Time collapsed into a single, shattering moment. There they were, in our bed, my wife Carmen and my best friend Diego. Rafael? My name escaped her lips like a confession. Their naked bodies scrambled beneath sheets my mother had given us as a wedding gift. The crucifix on the wall seemed to stare down in judgment at all three of us. Blood rushed in my ears. 15 years of marriage destroyed in a single glance. Please, Raphael, I can explain. Carmen pleaded, clutching the sheet to her chest. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her face. Diego didn't speak. He just reached for his pants on the floor, eyes never meeting mine. My business partner, my compadre, the man I'd trusted with everything, my money, my family, my future. How long? The words felt like glass in my throat. Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Cuánto tiempo? I slammed my fist against the doorframe, the pain barely registering against the agony in my chest. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months of lies. 6 months of working late. 6 months of me the fool, bringing her favorite conques from the panaderia, leaving little notes in her lunch. 6 months of Diego sitting at my dinner table, bouncing my children on his knee, planning our next construction project while planning to destroy my life. I backed away, my wedding band suddenly burning against my skin like a brand of shame. I tore it off and threw it across the room, the small gold circle bouncing off the dresser mirror with a pathetic ping. Raphael, please. Diego finally spoke, reaching for his wallet with hands that had built my business and destroyed my marriage. We can work this out. I'll give you anything. The rage exploded from somewhere deep inside me, a volcanic fury that had been building for months without my knowing why. ¿Crees que puedes comprar mi dignidad? You think you can buy my dignity? My hands found his throat before I knew what was happening. I felt Carmen pulling at my shoulders, screaming my name, but all I could see was red. All I could feel was the betrayal of 20 years of friendship crushing my windpipe like his throat was crushing under my grip. God help me, I wanted to kill him. But something stopped me. Not her screams. Not his gasping. Something deeper, a voice cutting through my blind fury like my abuela's whispered prayers had once cut through my childhood nightmares. Not this way, hijo. Not like this. I released him, watching him collapse back onto my marriage bed, gasping and clutching his throat. Get out. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow and distant. Both of you. Get out of my house. This is my house too. Carmen cried, clutching the sheet around her naked body. Where am I supposed to go? Should have thought about that before you brought him into our bed. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand, the same nightstand where I'd placed love letters to my wife just last week, and backed away from the wreckage of my life. 2 years earlier, life had painted itself in golden hues. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of our home in San Antonio's historic South Town, casting delicate patterns across the hardwood floors I'd so carefully restored. I remember humming along to Vicente Fernandez as I prepared breakfast, the smell of fresh coffee and chorizo filling our kitchen like incense. Rafa, this is amazing, Carmen said, taking a bite of the breakfast tacos I'd made with the recipe my mother had taught me. Her smile still had the power to make my heart skip after 15 years together. You spoil me too much. I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. Only the best for you, mi amor. Only the best for my queen. Our home was my masterpiece, a century-old shotgun house that Carmen and I had rescued from demolition and transformed room by room into the neighborhood showcase. Each weekend spent stripping paint, replacing fixtures and breathing life back into neglected bones had been a labor of love. This house represented everything I'd worked for. Stability, success, the American dream my father could only imagine when he crossed the border with nothing but determination and calloused hands. Vasquez and Sons construction was thriving beyond my wildest dreams. What had started as just me and a pickup truck was now a company with 12 full-time employees and contracts throughout South Texas. We'd grown so fast I could barely keep up with the demand. That's when Diego Herrera entered my life like an answered prayer. "You need a partner, hermano," he'd said 2 years earlier, sitting in my office with a briefcase full of contracts and connections. "Someone who understands the business side while you handle the craft." Diego brought capital I desperately needed and relationships with developers I could never access alone. Within 6 months of our partnership, our revenue had doubled. Within a year, we were bidding on projects that had once been impossible dreams. "You're blessed, Rafael," Diego would say, slapping my back as we surveyed another completed project. "Beautiful wife, healthy kids, growing business. God has been good to you." I nodded, proud but also humbled by how quickly our fortunes had changed. Sunday mornings found our family in the third pew at Sacred Heart, Diego often joining us for Mass and the Sunday dinners that followed. He'd become like family, Uncle Diego, to my children. The brother I'd never had. But success came with a price I hadn't anticipated. The longer hours, the constant phone calls, the pressure to maintain our growth trajectory. I found myself leaving for work before the children woke and returning after they'd gone to bed. "You're working too much, Rafael," Pastor Morales told me after service one Sunday, his weathered hand on my shoulder. "Remember what our Lord said about serving two masters." I nodded respectfully but dismissed his concern. "The business needs me, Pastor. These opportunities won't last forever. I have to provide for my family." What I didn't tell him was that work had become my drug of choice. Every successful project, every new contract, every dollar in the bank account fed an addiction I didn't recognize, the addiction to being needed, to being successful, to being the man everyone looked up to. Carmen began to change, though I told myself it was just the natural evolution of marriage. She spent more time at the gym, bought new clothes, started wearing makeup to go grocery shopping. When I complimented her efforts, she'd smile distantly and say she was just trying to take better care of herself. The warning signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs through our daily life, but I was too busy building my empire to follow the trail. Late nights at her sister's house, whispered phone conversations that ended when I entered the room. New passwords on her devices that she claimed were for security. Diego's sudden intimate knowledge of Carmen's schedule should have been the loudest alarm. His offers to pick up groceries when she was too busy. His knowing exactly when she'd be home from her evening yoga classes that seemed to run later and later each week. "Maybe you should join Carmen at one of those yoga sessions," my mother suggested during one of our Sunday visits. "You both seem stressed lately." "I'm not stressed, Mama. I'm successful. There's a difference." She looked at me with the penetrating gaze that had seen through my childhood lies and teenage rebellions. Sometimes what we work hardest to build can still fall apart if we don't tend to its heart. "Remember, Mia, only what's built on the rock will stand when the storm comes." I bristled at the implication. What did she know about building something from nothing? I was present when it mattered. I provided for my family better than my father had ever provided for us. I was faithful to my wife, attended church regularly, and tithed 10% of our gross income. What more could God want from me? At church I volunteered for every committee that would have me: maintenance, men's breakfast, even the children's ministry despite my exhaustion. I served communion with a practiced smile, while inside I was begging God for energy, for time, for the strength to keep all the plates spinning. You have such a servant's heart, people would say, not seeing how I was using service to escape the growing emptiness at home, the gnawing sense that something essential was slipping through my fingers like sand. My prayers became desperate business negotiations with the Almighty. Lord, if you bless this next contract, I'll give an extra 5% to the building fund. If you keep my family together, I'll serve you even better. Just help me close the Jimenez deal, and I'll prove I'm worthy of your blessings. But I never asked Jesus what he wanted from me. I was too busy telling him what I needed from him, too proud to admit that my carefully constructed life was developing cracks I couldn't patch with hard work and good intentions. The month before everything fell apart, those cracks widened into fissures. Carmen and I fought more frequently about money, about time, about things so trivial they couldn't possibly be the real issue. She accused me of caring more about the business than our family. I accused her of not appreciating the sacrifices I was making for our future. When was the last time we actually talked, Rafael? She asked one evening after a particularly bitter argument about my missing another school event. Really talked, not just logistics about schedules and bills. I couldn't remember. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but instead of acknowledging it, I deflected. I'm building something for us, Carmen, for our children's future. Why can't you see that? What I see is a man who's forgotten he has a present while he's building his future. That night, she slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. I told myself it was temporary, just the stress of our rapid business growth. Things would get better after the Jimenez project. After we established ourselves in the market. After I proved we belonged at this level of success. The weekend before my world collapsed, we hosted our annual barbecue for the church small group. I stood at the grill, flipping carne asada and accepting compliments on our beautiful home, our seemingly perfect life. Diego worked the crowd like a politician, charming the church ladies and engaging the men in discussions about business and faith. You two are such an example to the rest of us, commented Sister Maria, one of the newer church members, watching as Carmen brought out a tray of drinks while Diego helped serve. A beautiful family, successful business, servant hearts. God has truly blessed you. I smiled and nodded, swallowing the bitter taste of knowing something was deeply wrong, but being too proud to name it. Pride kept me silent. Pride told me I could fix whatever was broken through sheer force of will. Pride whispered that appearances mattered more than truth, that admitting problems was admitting failure. I had no idea that in just 1 week, that same pride would be shattered on the bedroom floor of the home I'd worked so hard to build. The night air hit my face as I stumbled onto our porch, leaving behind the wreckage of 15 years. The historic neighborhood I'd once found so charming now felt like a mockery. All these beautiful old houses hiding their own secrets, their own betrayals. I drove aimlessly through streets I'd known my entire life, past La Velita, where Carmen and I had danced at fiesta during our courtship, past the Riverwalk, where I'd proposed on one knee beside the cypress trees. Every landmark now contaminated with the poison of betrayal. My phone buzzed incessantly against my leg, Carmen's name lighting up the screen, then Diego's, then hers again. I wanted to throw the device into the San Antonio River and watch it sink. Instead, I parked at San Fernando Cathedral and stumbled inside, collapsing in the back pew where I'd sat as a child, listening to my grandmother whisper prayers in Spanish while incense drifted through shafts of colored light. Why? I whispered to the empty church, my voice echoing off stone walls that had heard similar laments for over 2 centuries. Why did you let this happen? The candles flickered in the darkness, saints watching from their niches with expressions that seemed more accusing than comforting. Had I been blind? Had I ignored the signs because I was too busy building my monument to success? My phone vibrated again, another call from Diego. This time something made me answer. Rafael, please, let me explain. Explain what? My voice cracked like dry timber. How you planned this? How long you've been laughing at me behind my back? It wasn't planned, hermano. It just happened. You have to believe me. Don't call me that. Brothers don't destroy each other's families. There was a pause, then his voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Listen carefully. There are things you don't know about the business, about the Jimenez contract, about why this all had to happen. Meet me tomorrow morning at Rosario's, and I'll explain everything. Something in his tone made my blood chill. What about the Jimenez contract? Just meet me, please. There's more at stake here than you realize. More than just your marriage. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone in the cathedral's dim light. What was he talking about? The Jimenez contract was our biggest job. A $200,000 apartment complex renovation that would secure our company's future and establish us as major players in the San Antonio market. I knelt at the altar rail where I'd received my first communion 35 years earlier, but the prayers wouldn't come. Only questions that had no answers and rage that had nowhere to go. The next morning, I arrived at Rosario's 30 minutes early, needing coffee and time to steel myself for whatever Diego was going to tell me. The familiar sounds of the kitchen, sizzling chorizo, clinking plates, rapid Spanish conversation normally comforted me. Today they felt like noise. Diego arrived looking haggard, his usual confident demeanor cracked like old paint. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his normally pristine appearance was disheveled. He carried a manila envelope that he clutched like a lifeline. Before you say anything, he began, sliding the envelope across the scarred wooden table. You need to see this. Inside were bank statements, contract copies, transfer receipts, and credit applications. My name was forged on documents I'd never seen. Money had been moved from our business accounts to personal accounts I didn't recognize. Cash advances from casinos I'd never visited. A paper trail of financial devastation painted to look like my handiwork. What is this? My voice barely functioned. I've been skimming from the Jimenez job, he said simply, as if discussing the weather. Almost 60,000 so far. The cafe seemed to tilt around me. The sounds of morning conversation faded to white noise. You've been stealing from our company? From you, he corrected, his eyes never leaving mine. The accounts are structured so you'd be liable. When the audit comes, and it will come, you'll be the one facing charges. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold them. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm leaving. Carmen and I are leaving tonight, and I wanted to give you a choice. He leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of alcohol on his breath. This was never supposed to happen this way, Rafael. You weren't supposed to come home early yesterday. A choice? What choice? Come with us. Leave all this behind. Start fresh in Houston. I have connections there, opportunities that don't exist in San Antonio. His eyes were intense, almost manic. Or stay and face the consequences of what I've done. The full scope of his betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. Not just my wife, not just my marriage, my business, my reputation, my freedom, everything I'd spent 20 years building. You planned this, I said slowly, the words scraping my throat raw. All of it, the partnership, the affair, everything. Diego's silence was answer enough. But why? The question came out as barely a whisper. We were friends, brothers. Why would you do this to me? For the first time since he'd sat down, Diego's mask slipped completely. His face contorted with something between guilt and rage. Because it should have been mine, he hissed. All of it. the success, the beautiful wife, the perfect life. Do you know what it's like to watch someone have everything you want and act like they deserve it? I worked for everything I have. You worked, he laughed bitterly. You got lucky. You married the right woman, started your business at the right time, in the right place. Some of us weren't born with your advantages. I stared at this man I'd called friend, seeing him clearly for the first time. What advantages? I started with nothing. My father was a day laborer. Your father was a day laborer who saved every penny so his son could go to trade school. Diego interrupted. My father was a day laborer who drank every penny he earned. You had a family who supported your dreams. I had a family who crushed them. The pieces began falling into place. Diego's knowledge of my background, his strategic entry into my life just as the business was taking off, his careful cultivation of relationships with my family and friends. How long have you been planning this? 3 years, he said simply. Ever since I met you at that contractors convention. You were everything I wanted to be: successful, respected, happily married. I studied you, Rafael. I learned everything about your business, your methods, your weaknesses, and your greatest weakness was your trust. He pulled out his wallet, counting out bills with steady hands. The money's already moved to offshore accounts. By Monday the Gemini people will notice the shortfall. They'll call the police. Your signature is on everything, Rafael. The loan applications, the transfer authorizations, the gambling debts. Who do you think they'll believe? The successful contractor with a secret gambling problem, or the junior partner who tried to stop him? I don't gamble. You do now. Credit card applications in your name. Cash advances at 4 different casinos. Security footage of someone who looks remarkably like you losing thousands of dollars. Amazing what a good photographer and some creative editing can accomplish. My mind reeled. The security footage. My cousin Tomas. We've always looked similar. Amazing how easily people see what they expect to see. He slid the stack of bills across the table. There's enough here for gas money to Houston. Carmen's already packed. The kids can join us once this all blows over. We can all start fresh. I stared at this stranger wearing my best friend's face. Everything I'd built, my business, my reputation, my family, my financial security, he'd systematically destroyed while sitting at my dinner table, laughing at my jokes, playing with my children. And if I don't come with you, then you face this alone. Carmen's made her choice. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You'll serve at least 7 years if you're lucky, probably 10. Your kids will grow up thinking their father is a criminal. He shrugged as if discussing the weather. Or you can come with us and start over. Your choice. He stood, leaving the evidence of my destruction scattered across the cafe table like the remains of my shattered life. You have until 6 tonight to decide, he said, checking his expensive watch, the one I'd helped him pick out for Christmas. Carmen's waiting at the airport hotel, room 412. The flight to Houston leaves at 8. He walked away, leaving me sitting with the ruins of 20 years of hard work and honest living spread before me like a mockery. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 3 hours, staring at those papers until the words blurred together. Everything I'd worked for, gone. 2 decades of building a reputation, destroyed by careful planning and malicious intent. My children would grow up believing their father was a thief and a fool. The smart choice was obvious. Take the money. Run to Houston. Start over with whatever scraps Diego was willing to leave me. Accept the new reality he'd created and be grateful for his mercy. But something deeper kept me frozen in that parking lot. The same voice that had stopped me from killing Diego in our bedroom was speaking again, clearer now, cutting through the panic and rage and despair. This is not your battle anymore, Hijo. This was never your battle. I drove home to our empty house. Diego had been thorough in his destruction, not just my wife, but furniture, electronics, anything of value. The house I'd lovingly restored room by room had been gutted like a fish, leaving only the bones. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing off bare walls that had once displayed family photos and children's artwork. In our bedroom, their bedroom now, the sheets were gone, replaced by a bare mattress that might as well have been a gravestone marking the death of my marriage. For the first time in 20 years, I got on my knees on the hardwood floor I'd installed with my own hands and prayed not to impress God or bargain with Him, but simply to surrender everything to Him. Jesus, I whispered, my voice echoing in the empty room, I can't fix this. I can't save my marriage, my business, or my reputation. I've been trying to earn your love through my work, my service, my perfect Christian life, but it was all built on sand. The house creaked around me, settling into its emptiness like a sigh. I know I've been serving myself, not you. I've been building my kingdom, not yours. I've been so busy trying to prove I deserved your blessings that I forgot to actually follow you. Tears came then, hot and cleansing. I'm tired of carrying this weight. I'm tired of pretending I'm strong enough to handle everything myself. In that moment, kneeling on the floor of my empty house, I felt something I'd never experienced in all my years of church attendance and religious activity. Not the presence of Christ as a helper for my plans, but as the Lord of my life, regardless of what that life looked like. Save me, Jesus, not my circumstances. Save me. Come into my heart, not as a consultant for my success, but as my Savior. I surrender everything, my pride, my future, my pain, my children's respect, my reputation, all of it. I choose you over everything else, even if it costs me everything else. The peace that flooded my heart made no earthly sense. My circumstances hadn't changed. Diego's betrayal was still real. The evidence against me was still damning. Carmen was still waiting in a hotel room to start a new life with my former best friend. But for the first time in my adult life, my identity wasn't tied to my circumstances. I wasn't Rafael the successful contractor, Rafael the perfect husband, Rafael the model Christian who had it all together. I was simply Rafael, beloved son of the Most High God, known by name and claimed as his own, regardless of what happened next. Monday morning, I walked into the police station before they could come for me. I brought every piece of evidence Diego had shown me and told the truth about everything: the affair, the embezzlement, the systematic destruction of my life by someone I trusted completely. Detective Martinez looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You could have run, she said, studying the financial documents spread across her desk. Your partner and your wife are already gone. These accounts are emptied. Why didn't you disappear with them? Because running would have meant living a lie for the rest of my life, I answered simply. Jesus set me free from that. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing about my reference to faith. She'd seen enough destroyed lives to know that some people found strength in strange places. The investigation took 6 months. Diego and Carmen were eventually found in Houston, living under false names, with new social security numbers, and a lifestyle funded by stolen money. Most of the funds were recovered, but the damage to my reputation and business was complete. During those months of legal limbo, I discovered what real fellowship looked like. Brother Martinez from our church visited me weekly, not with platitudes or easy answers, but with presence. He'd sit with me while I processed the betrayal, prayed with me when words failed, and reminded me that my identity was secure even when everything else was uncertain. You know, he said, One afternoon, as we sat in his backyard sharing a simple meal, the Apostle Paul wrote his most joyful letter from prison. Not because his circumstances were good, but because his focus was right. I pleaded guilty to charges of negligent oversight, a misdemeanor that carried an 18-month sentence, but acknowledged that I'd been deceived rather than deliberately criminal. The prosecutor, impressed by my cooperation and character witnesses, recommended the minimum sentence. Prison was where my real education began, not in construction or business management, but in understanding grace. The men I met there, drug dealers and thieves, con artists and violent offenders, taught me more about the gospel than I'd learned in 20 years of Sunday services. I led Bible studies for men who, like me, had built their lives on shifting foundations. We studied the Sermon on the Mount together, focusing on Jesus' words about wise and foolish builders. We weren't the religious elite, we were the broken, the fallen, the ones who discovered that human strength wasn't enough. The difference between the wise man and the fool isn't their circumstances. I told the men gathered in the prison chapel one Wednesday evening, it's what they built their lives on. The wise man's house got hit by the same storm as the fool's house, but only one foundation held. Jorge, a gang member serving 10 years for assault, raised his hand. So how do we know if we're building on rock or sand? Ask yourself this, I replied, remembering my own painful journey to this understanding. If you lost everything tomorrow, your freedom, your reputation, your family, your health, would you still know who you are? Would you still have peace? If your identity depends on what you have or what you do, you're building on sand. The conversations that followed those Bible studies were transformational for them and for me. These men, stripped of pretense by their circumstances, were hungry for truth in a way I'd never been when my life was comfortable. When I was released after 14 months for good behavior, my construction license was gone. My house had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution. My children, living with my mother, looked at me with a mixture of love and confusion they were too young to fully understand. But I had something I'd never possessed during all my years of outward success: genuine peace. The peace that comes from knowing your identity isn't built on what you accomplish, but on what Jesus accomplished for you. I started over at age 42, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a relationship with Jesus that was finally real. A small apartment in a working-class neighborhood. A job with another contractor who was willing to hire an ex-convict. Supervised visits with my children every other weekend. Learning to be their father again instead of their provider. It wasn't much by the world's standards. My peers from the construction association avoided me. Former friends crossed the street when they saw me coming. I drove a 15-year-old pickup truck and shopped at thrift stores. But when I knelt beside my simple bed each night, thanking Jesus for his goodness, I meant it in a way I never had when I was praying in my beautiful house with my successful business and my picture-perfect family. The betrayal that had destroyed my old life had been the grace that led me to new life, real life in Christ. 2 years later, I stood before our church congregation on a Sunday evening, giving my testimony to a room full of people who'd watched my fall and were witnessing my restoration. I thought I was living for Jesus, I said, looking out at faces that reflected my own former confusion. But I was living for myself and asking Jesus to bless it. The difference isn't small, it's eternal. In the third row, Brother Martinez sat with tears in his eyes, nodding encouragement. Beside him was a young man whose business had just failed. Behind them, a woman whose husband had left her for his secretary, and a teenager whose parents were fighting addiction. Your foundation will be tested, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion welling in my chest. The question isn't whether the storm will come, It's what you've built your life on when it does. I built on sand, success, reputation, financial security, other people's approval. When the storm hit, everything collapsed. I paused, making eye contact with individuals throughout the congregation. But Jesus didn't abandon me in the wreckage. He met me there, and on the ruins of my self-made life, he began building something that could never be shaken. A life built on his love, his grace, his identity for me. A hand raised near the back. An older gentleman I recognized but didn't know well. How do you forgive someone who destroys your life intentionally? The question hung in the air like incense. You don't, I answered, honestly. Not in your own strength. Forgiveness isn't a feeling. It's a choice you make to release the right to avenge to God. I had to choose to forgive Diego and Carmen every day for months before my heart caught up with my will. Another hand, this time from a woman in her 50s. Do you ever regret not taking their offer to run away? I smiled, thinking of my small apartment, my modest job, my simple life. The life I lost wasn't worth keeping. It was built on pride, performance, and pretense. The life I found in Christ was worth everything I lost to gain it. I closed my testimony the same way I closed every day now. Thank you, Jesus, not for giving me what I wanted, but for giving me what I needed, yourself. After the service, 3 men approached me. One was facing bankruptcy. Another had discovered his wife's addiction. The third was dealing with a wayward teenage son. They didn't want quick fixes or easy answers. They wanted to know how to build their lives on something that wouldn't fail them. We met the next morning at 6 a.m. in the church fellowship hall, and that small group grew into a ministry for men whose foundations had been shaken. We called it Solid Rock, not very creative, but accurate. Today, 5 years after my world collapsed, I run a small ministry for men coming out of prison and others whose lives have been shattered by their own choices or others' betrayals. My children and I have rebuilt our relationship on honesty instead of appearances. They're old enough now to understand what happened, and they respect the man I've become more than they ever did the man I was. Carmen and Diego divorced 2 years ago. She lives in Dallas now with their child, a son I've never met. I pray for them regularly and send Christmas cards with no expectation of response. Forgiveness isn't about reconciliation, it's about freedom. Diego's schemes eventually caught up with him. He's serving 8 years in federal prison for fraud charges related to other victims after our case. I've written him twice, not to gloat but to share the gospel that transformed my life. He hasn't responded, but I keep writing. Grace is like that, persistent, unearned, always available. The storms will come, for you, for me, for everyone. But when they do, the question won't be whether you're strong enough to weather them. The question will be what you've built your life upon. Choose wisely, hermano. Choose the rock.